Hey, this is Ryan and Victoria Cole here, and we are excited to have you listen to this episode today. We're talking about voter issues, and today we're tackling the topic of immigration. So stay tuned. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, so I'm particularly passionate about this topic, and I think it's something that's very important and something that a lot of Americans are nervous about or really, passionate about as well, because there are a lot of people from other places in the world that are wanting to come to the United States. I mean, I am first and foremost an immigrant myself. I came here over 20 years ago when I was 10 years old with my 11 brothers and sisters, my mom and dad, my grandma, my aunt, my uncle, and 3 of their kids. So as you can imagine, we took up about half of the plane.
And I don't know why, but every time I tell somebody that my wife is Ukrainian, they ask me, was she a mail-away bride?
Oh, yeah. When we first were dating, and then even like before, once we got married, that was one of the biggest things, was like, she must have been like a mail order bride. And I was like, what are you talking about?
I guess that's a thing for some people, but no, she was here.
I was here, I think, for, let's see, 9, 10, 11, about 11 years before we met.
She was an American citizen.
And I was already an American citizen. So.
Not that would have mattered. I would have married her anyways. And
yes, but I wasn't trying to get married to get a certification, because I know that there's some people that do that as well. But that's another topic. But yeah, I'm passionate about that because I feel like, I think United States is really such an example of, a thriving country. And so I think that, even with our even with our Constitution, it's the longest standing Constitution. Even if you look at other countries, I mean, most of the time, whenever with the switch of power, there was a switch in a Constitution. And so I think that United States kind of displays success. It displays opportunity, and I would say stability. Mm-hmm. I think even coming from my country, that's the kind of vision that we had as well. And that's not to say that we thought that money grew on trees here, but it was definitely more opportunities. For example, like in my country, there are strict regulations in regards to who can drive. You have to be like a specific age. A lot of females didn't drive there. My dad didn't have a car until he was like in his late 30s. So just a lot more opportunities for us that was presented. And so, my dad got an invitation from my aunt who lived here already for 5 years. We had to get sponsored, go through a lot of paperwork, a lot of interviews, which my parents traveled to Moscow, which is in Russia, which our country borders Russia. So most people get that mixed up that, you must be a Russian. So they had an interview in Moscow. Then my dad had to fill the stack of papers. It was like a year-long process.
And then you're one of 12, for those who don't know our story. Victoria is one of 12 children.
Yeah.
So imagine immigrating with 12 kids, flying across the world, going through all that paperwork process. The price of the tickets alone was how much at that time?
It was around $1,000. It was about $13,000 loan that we took out that my dad had to pay once he got here. But
the flights, how much?
Just the flights. It was $13,000.
Yeah,
and that was in 2000.
Yes.
Right now they're probably about $2,500
a piece,
or $3,000. Yeah, it's very expensive.
Not to mention the moving fees, coming here by faith without speaking the language. Thankfully, it was, I think, a Christian.
It was a church that sponsored us. I mean, that was kind of a requirement. Of course, my aunt was not, there's no way she would have been able to sponsor all of us. I mean, there was 2 of her siblings came and they both had kids. And my dad, of course, had like 12 of them. So that was a lot. But the church sponsored us. They set us up with a rental house, which had 3 bedrooms. Every time I drive by that house, it looks so tiny. I'm like, how in the world did we fit into that thing? But they were very sweet and kind. They donated, clothing and toys for us and really set us up. And, we were able to find my dad a job. So he started working right away.
And that's a beautiful story.
So I'm
it's
grateful.
Reflection of the Christian community. That
I'm
really
very
does.
grateful.
We live by biblical principles and we reach out to the foreigner and we embrace them.
Yeah.
And it really, as the United States of America, we're that way.
Yeah.
The Statue of Liberty stands. It says, send me your you're poor, you're this, you're that. I don't want to misquote it, but basically, send me the least of these, and we will embrace them. And we've always been a country with open arms. I think it's become very political, the idea of immigration in the last, I would say, century or even less. But as far as our history as a country, I mean, think of the amount of immigrants or the number of people even now. I was looking at statistics over the last decade alone. The percentage of immigrants that we have taken in were, I believe, close to a million or so in comparison to other countries that were like 20,000, 30,000. And yes, we're a larger landmass, etc. But the whole myth that the United States of America is strict when it comes to immigration policies, we got to dispel that myth. Even Mexico has harsher immigration rules than we do. Even other countries in Europe, they have harsher immigration rules than we do. So to say right off the bat that it's so hard, yes, it's challenging. It takes a lot of faith and a lot of even resources at times. But we have embraced people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Are there challenges? Yes. But I think that challenge is what builds the strength in people and the endurance. Because when they get here, this isn't a country of free handouts.
No.
And I think a lot of immigrants do find that when they come here. Americans work hard. We work longer hours than other countries, statistically. We really do have opportunity, but those opportunities have to be seized. Those opportunities have to be worked. But that's the beauty, too, of our country, that we give opportunity for anyone, that when you come into this country, you could start at the bottom and you could become a millionaire, you could become a billionaire, or you could become a senator of a country. I look at some of the senators now who are immigrants to this country, who were born in foreign countries, and in the short amount of time that they were living here, went from war-torn countries to now elected officials. And just looking at that beauty in our country, we cannot take that for granted, and I want to insert that there. But keep going about your story. What was your immigration status? It was a refugee, right?
It was a refugee because we were still coming out of like the whole USSR. There was still a lot of turmoil that was going on. And I think a few years later that status was no longer
it was
existed.
expired.
Yeah.
But there was in particular there was a lot of turmoil. And so in talking about refugee statuses and people who seek asylum, there are outlines as to what that means, right? It means people who are persecuted for their political beliefs, for their religious beliefs, whether they're a part of a social group that is persecuted. But
there's also a thing called war refugees
and war, those who are coming from war-torn areas.
Yep.
What it does not include, which I think people don't really understand, it doesn't include economic disparities or economic challenges. It doesn't also include familial challenges like
personal,
domestic abuse situations. And so when we look at the crisis on the border between the U.S. and Mexico, that's one thing that we have to include as well. Like, what does it really mean to be a refugee and or seeking asylum? And really looking at that situation, we automatically assume that it's a bunch of Mexicans coming over the border.
Yeah, it's
that's
definitely
not the case.
True. Yeah.
In fact, there is a crisis. They call it the triangle in the Central America area, Honduras, Venezuela. I think it's this triangle of Central American countries who basically have endured war, political
issues.
corruption,
There's a lot of
etc.
corruption, yeah.
So there are a lot of people migrating from there up through Mexico and coming through the Mexico border into the United States of America. And this crisis that all of a sudden it's just not mentioned anymore right now, really. When's the last time you heard about children's in cages on the news? When is the last time you heard about illegal immigration, etc.? It's just like poof. It's a non-issue. But you're wrong. It's still happening. It's an issue that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis at the border between the United States and Mexico. There is large portions of the wall that Donald Trump said. It's being built. And we can go into our ideals about that and what we believe here in a few minutes. But just laying out the current climate, right? The vast majority of people who are immigrating to the United States and are approved are not necessarily pouring into the country from the Mexico border.
Right.
They're coming from everywhere in the world, and 40% of those who are coming who become illegal immigrants actually are visa overstays. And so there's some issues there that move beyond just building a wall. Now, the question is, what is the Christian perspective? And I think too, looking at the media who spotlights whatever they want to and spins a story the way that they want to meet a certain political or social agenda. That's what I think riles up the majority of Americans with anger. We see this situation happening, and then all of a sudden it's a non-situation. When's the last time you heard about it?
And it's scary that at a wave of a hand, we can, spark up rioting, looting, or whatever, and then
this is an issue,
down.
And then now it's not an issue.
Yeah, and now everybody's quiet. But it's very important for us to be knowledgeable about these things. I mean, personally for me, I didn't know what was going on in those on those borders. One of the shows that I watched, I like documentaries. I really like things that are happening right now, and it really opened up my eyes to see what is truly going on these southern borders. So the show is called Border Force, and I'm sure it's dramatized in some way, and they show like the most dramatic parts of it, but our border patrol officers are overwhelmed, and that's one of the biggest issues that they say is immigration. And it's not like that they're not compassionate. They said we all have families, and for us to see these people, come to seek asylum, our heart breaks for some of these children
and I think
and families.
The narrative is that they don't care, or that definitely there is some probably who have become
maybe
hardened, disillusioned by just how much workload and how many people that are funneling through these centers. But I think they all come in with a certain level of compassion and humanity. And a lot of the Border Patrol workers are Hispanic. A lot of them are Mexican.
Yeah.
And so these are their people in a sense. And so to demonize them as, agents of Donald Trump or whatever the case may be, I think that's just an ignorant perspective.
Yeah. I mean, they're really doing a great job, and
they're doing the
lot.
best that they can.
It's a lot to
I don't think
through.
that there's people lining up down the street to sign up for that job.
No.
And I mean, it's similar to the police force.
It's really hard, because what I've learned is that it's not necessarily just, allowing asylum people to come through. It's on day-to-day basis. There's a crossing of the border for people that, work in the United States, or, go
are
for
traveling
entertainment
or
or shopping or
visiting,
whatever.
Recreation.
So one of the biggest things is that they're dealing with is, they say majority of the people that come through, about 90%, are good. But it's those 10% that they're trying to get, because a lot of them are cartel. They're criminals. They are sent by cartel members. There is a lot of drug trafficking. And it was astounding to me the ways that this cartel is trying to push the drugs through the border. And that's not, this is to protect your children, because this is illegal drugs that are coming onto this land. And because we've been growing in demand in the United States, of course, they want to supply us with that. And it's a humongous business. I mean, they will put packages in tires. They will put them in the empty spaces of the car. And then you have those people that come and they are really seeking asylum, and it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking for them to drag their toddlers. And I, as a mother, seeing how a mom, you could tell her anxiety level, and she's trying to keep her cool because She doesn't want her children to start freaking out, and her kids probably don't know what's going on.
And then
But
she's being told that her children are going to be ripped from her arms as soon. That's the thing. Let me just insert there. I know you're talking about that documentary, the children being ripped from their parents. First off, this is nothing new. It's something that the Trump administration, they applied the laws that were really already on the books, and there is no official take away the child from the parent policy. What the policy is that those who cross the border, not through a port of entry, not through an asylum seeking center, but just illegally, and that they're caught, is that they will basically be federally charged with a crime. And our laws automatically say that if you're put in a federal prison, that you can't take children with you, obviously. So that creates this kind of situation where the children, are separated. And it's happening in large numbers, too. I think that through this time period, it was over 4,000 children. And it's definitely a problem. And it's a problem that Donald Trump, I believe he did address it, and he should continue to address it. Trying in as many ways as possible to prevent that from happening. But the idea that a person standing in line seeking asylum, once they get up to the door, that their child is going to be separated from them, that's not happening.
Now, there are cases where the children are just being dropped off at the border.
That's true as well.
And then the officers are left to try to figure out whose kid this is, if they've been in a system. There's kids, under 17 that, are trying to be pushed. And sadly, some of them are actually recruited by the cartels. And the way they read it is by their tattoos.
And children, and when we say children, we're including 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds.
Yeah, 50, yes. Like very, very young, something.
But they're not toddlers, but still they've been kind of recruited within this system. Then there's a combination of human trafficking going on.
Very much so, yeah.
And then also,
even to like what you addressed about Honduras and Venezuela, it's also a big money-making business. What I come to find out, that the cartel, basically, you pay the cartel members and they will drop you off at the border. They can actually create you some false documents, and so the officers will start an investigation and say, well, how did you get these documents? Who did them? Who dropped you off? How much did you pay? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just know that they just dropped me off at the border. So they help them cross, whatever borders that they're coming from, whether it's Honduras, whether it's Venezuela, and that's another way that they're also making money. And it's also very dangerous, especially if you bring your children for the ride. And I know that a lot of these people have a legitimate cause to flee. Some of them their family members are being killed by gang members, by criminals. You're talking about in Honduras, it's a very big problem.
So there's a couple of issues that we have to address there, because first off, declaring a refugee status is not the same as declaring asylum. Declaring a refugee status is similar to what your family did during that particular time, and you do that from your home country.
Right.
Seeking asylum means that you're fleeing a presently dangerous situation.
Right.
That if you didn't run, you were going to be killed. And you show up to the door, and it's almost like it's an emergency situation where they're knocking on your door, help me, help me.
Right.
But those things have to be proven. And they have
to be vetted.
Yes. I do think that there are some flaws in the way that system works, and you can look into it. Whenever a person comes, let's say from the Mexican border, they're seeking asylum, they have to fill out paperwork. I believe it's like 12 pages long. They have an instruction manual. Both of those are in English, and they have to be filled out in English, and that's a barrier, number one. Number two, that reason for seeking asylum has to be proven. And it's proven based on what was written as the definition of what an asylum seeker is, what a refugee status is. It was actually passed down through the United Nations, and actually technically does not include what I mentioned early, domestic situations. So you talk about a wife running from an abusive husband with her children. That's not a means for seeking asylum at the border, unfortunately. Neither is technically gang-related activity, even if an entire country has been overrun by gangs and criminal activity. That's not technically a reason for seeking asylum, because it has to be a government level persecution, now it also depends on the immigration judge that you get as to whether or not they're going to rule for or against. But the courts are so overrun by cases. I think even now there's a backlog of about 300,000 cases that they're continually working through in masses. And then you have the incentivization of showing up at the border, using asylum as a means of getting through the door.
Right.
Because you know that if you can declare asylum and you're proven as worthy of that status, it's a pretty easy, and I'm say easy very loosely, but you have a track to be able to get a green card, begin to work, and work your way into citizenship.
As long as you don't have a record.
Correct. But coming to the border for economic reasons, just because you believe there's better economic opportunities, or running from a social or even a gang-related persecution, isn't a valid asylum seeking. Now whether or not that needs to be changed, that's something that can be discussed. But by the law, that's not what warrants an asylum seeker access to the country.
What makes this country what it is, I think the United States has to govern at the end of the day. And, we could just open up all the borders and tell everybody to come here. But if there's not rules and laws in place, then it's not going to be what it is. I mean, you'll give it a year or two and it will become run down, and people are going to try to go look for an asylum somewhere else, as we have talked about this before. So there definitely has to be rules and policies set in place. Now, I'm not saying that they're all right. I think that it's a continual working process.
There are laws that we as Christians, morally speaking, we should push up against and even defy at times.
Yeah.
When it comes to having compassion for those who are seeking refugee status, we have to remember as Christians that we too are strangers in a foreign land, and that God adopted us as his children. And the Bible implores us to take care of the stranger and the widow and the orphan, and to really provide for the needs of the least of these, and to seek those who are in need, and be the hands and feet of Jesus, essentially. It also, the Bible is a story of so many refugees, whether you look at Moses or Ruth, or even Jesus, in a sense. Abraham, leave your country, leave your people, go to a new land. The situations were very different. We're living in higher population in the world as a whole, and just, other scenarios. But in general, we should remain open with our arms to embrace the immigrant. We're all immigrants when it comes down to it. And so we should have that level of compassion, and also recognize how much privilege we have just because we're born in the United States of America. And that's not something to take for granted.
Yeah.
But there are repercussions to not having boundaries in your country. And the Bible even implored Israel to build walls. Nehemiah built a wall. Who else in the Bible built a wall? You can name it. There were instances where Israel created borders, where they drove out people. And there were immigration crises throughout the Bible that we can look to. So here's, first off, we as a country can, we should even morally be able to build barriers to outline territory, and deem this as a nation with certain laws, values, and principles. And by opening that up freely and allowing anyone in, you are opening yourself up to a cultural crisis and an economic crisis. And that's not to say those people are not in need, and we should accept refugees 100%. But I think there has to be some limit, and there has to be some other means of empowering those individuals within their countries to be the change that they want to see. There always has to be deliverers that arise within countries to be able to bring democracy in, or to bring solutions in that will transform those countries. And we see the United Nations or some of these other organizations doing that. They're seeking to create equality across the board globally. Now, there are definitely flaws with the United Nations, and we could talk about that. But just in general, understanding what happens when you allow masses of people from other cultures to come into your country, what that'll do to the culture as a whole. Mm-hmm. You see this now in European countries who brought in so many Syrian refugees, mm-hmm. which, I mean, they did so because there was a humanitarian crisis. But the vast majority of them were Muslim. What that did to the culture. I mean, we went to London a few years ago, and the culture as a whole was not as I expected it to be. And that's not speaking down to those who are Muslim. And, you know, Muslim is really an ethnic group, but more so those who practice Islam. And that affected the culture of London and Germany and some of these other countries. And that's the cost that you have to count. Mm-hmm. What are the negative aspects of that culture? What are the positive aspects of that culture? And if there becomes an imbalance in society, then there will be issues on a political level. Mm-hmm. So what are the solutions? Let's talk about some of the solutions, okay? Mm-hmm. Politically speaking, we can look at Republicans and Democrats. We know what Donald Trump wants. He wants to finish that wall. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's not a bad idea. And it's actually very feasible. But when you think about a wall, it's not a big, giant brick wall, etc. You're talking about border security, mm-hmm. Technology, drones, cameras, other means of guarding that barrier so that we don't have individuals coming into the country illegally. And even that term, I know it's been weaponized, illegal immigrants. It's just what it is. Really, they're immigrants, and by and large, a lot of them, we can't paint them with one big stroke of brushing them as criminals. That's not what we should do, because the vast majority of them are not criminals. The vast majority of them were seeking legitimate reasons for coming here, and they were frustrated with the process and sought other means to get into the country. And I understand that. And I think if you're listening out there, and if you have that title of illegal immigrant and you're scared, you know, that's not a stigma or a label that you have to wear. And we as a church have to be open to those even who are among us in our congregations that we may not know have the status of a legal immigrant. And in some ways, we should feel obliged to help them find immigration attorneys, help them find a pathway to resolve their situation to be able to stay in this country legally, you know? Mm-hmm. Is there anything you want to add there?
No, I think those are all good pointers. I think just, you know, having compassion towards these people, I think that kind of opened up my eyes to see that it's a bigger issue than just, you know, people flowing in and out.
Because you can have compassion and yet still abide by the law and understand that there's a need for law.
Because one thing that we talked about is that, you know, whenever you don't go through right protocols as well, you're not only putting yourself in danger, but it also incentivizes for people not to follow the protocol. You know what I mean? So like we went through a protocol. And, you know, it was like a year process. We had to, you know, take out a loan. We had to do all these things. And that's, of course, to cross the ocean via the plane. But, you know, I'm very proud of, you know, the fact that I'm here in the United States and the opportunities that I'm presented. But I also believe in due process because mm-hmm. I followed it through. And I believe that, you know, even with all its flaws, I think there is compassion in that, and then there is a lot of opportunities that is presented to you, a lot of help that the United States offers to, you know, immigrants, a lot of support. I mean, we are the proof, you know, as a family of 12. So I'm very grateful for that. And I definitely think that a lot of those things have to be addressed, but we as a nation have to govern our borders, and we have to vet and have the right process so that we, you know, have control in regards to who's coming in and coming out, because not everybody has the right intentions.
And what you said was important, not incentivizing taking the wrong path.
Yeah.
And when we incentivize people taking the wrong path, which means coming to the border
That
in the
overwhelms
South,
our.
it overwhelms the system, and it actually does harm for the people who have legitimate
Who have been
asylum
waiting.
cases
Yeah.
and who have been waiting for weeks and at times months, standing out in the heat with their families, and it's just horrible, horrendous situations. I do want to make a sub note that looking at the situations, I know we see children in cages. And it's heart-wrenching, those living conditions. What we have to understand is that it's not forever.
Right.
And they are underfunded, understaffed. We do need to increase the resources of those facilities for sure. But if we want to be honest, a lot of those people come from far worse situations, living in far worse communities or homes that are falling apart, and not having food to eat, etc. And this situation is actually better. It's hard for us to see that sitting in the comfort of our United States homes, etc. But knowing where they come from, it is not a bad situation all in all. Secondly, if we want to talk about living conditions of the needy, why don't you take a trip down to your homeless shelter and take a look at what families are living in who are homeless right now, and maybe start right there at changing the way those situations look and what the process is for helping those people arise out of that situation. It would change your perspective, knowing too that, hey, this isn't as bad as it's being portrayed. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where it's overcrowding and, we see the little silver blankets and all that kind of stuff. We need to open up and create more opportunity for some of these humanitarian organizations to bring supplies to the border, to minister to those on the border. We need to support ministries that are out there doing that, which there are, by donating some resources, money, etc. Because that's our Christian duty as well,
Right.
To seek and provide resources for those who are coming to our borders.
One of the things is what we've talked about before is virtue signaling, and that has become very popular to do on social media.
Yeah.
Because it's popular right now, I'm going to share it on my Facebook post because
And by sharing it somehow
helps somebody, but it's not.
It alleviates me
doesn't-
of the responsibility.
No, that's not how it works. The way it works is for us to get involved. I think it's very important that we're knowledgeable about these things so that we can teach our children, and we can also bring them to participate in those things. And first and foremost, like you said, to look in our communities and see the people that we are in need, that need our help right now before trying to bring more people in, which we have compassion for those as well. But as you said, funding those organizations that are doing just that because that's their passion.
Yeah.
I think it's more important to actually do something, and that does not necessarily mean that I need to donate a ton of money. Maybe it's your time, maybe you can donate some canned foods or, hand-me-downs. That's kind of how I grew up,
and really holding our legislators' feet to the fire to say, this is not a new issue. And if anything is going to be done about it, it doesn't necessarily fall upon the president. It falls upon the policymakers to be able to bring those solutions and come to the table. And we have to put their feet to the fire. Going back to the issue of incentivization, of coming in the wrong path. Number one, it hurts those who have true asylum reasons for coming to the United States. And have waited. Number two, it causes a economic disparity, especially when you talk about how our tax money is now going towards basically the Medicaid, the food stamps, those kind of things that immigrants usually partake in. And now even looking at the Democrat debate, not the Republican and Democrat, but just the Democrats last year who were debating, all of them raised their hand. We want to offer free health care to every person, even illegal immigrants, etc. Looking at what's happening with sanctuary cities, all of which are illegal, essentially. What that causes in terms of economic a downturn of our country that has to be addressed. So how do we address it? Because back in the 80s, because we have 11 million undocumented immigrants living among us.
Right.
Back in the 80s, that number was 3 million. And there was legislation that passed that basically gave these people a pathway to citizenship. And a lot of them are citizens today. And in doing so, there was like this underlying statement that this is the last time, we will never do this again. You know, we don't want to incentivize this, but we are handling those who are in our borders already. Now here we are, decades later. We don't just have 3 million who we're taking care of. We have 11 million new undocumented immigrants in our midst. And now Democrats are saying, again, let's automatically grant them citizenship, etc. Now, I definitely understand this. And I think that many Republicans would get on board with granting those individuals at least a pathway to citizenship, not immediate citizenship. Because what that would do, it would shift the voting pool, culturally speaking, automatically in one way or the other. By granting 11 million of them immediate citizenship means that they have voting power. They came here illegally. They should have a pathway to citizenship, yes, and their children should be born here, should be granted citizenship, yes, and that will solve that problem over time and fall into this cultural assimilation, which I believe in some ways is important. But we have to first stop the pouring in at the borders. That means securing our borders. Number 2, creating an e-verify system, which deals with the 40% and more of the undocumented immigrants who are here on overstayed visa. That means before they can have legitimate work and pathway for career advancement, they would have to be verified electronically. Clean up that system. Also, I think that we have to tighten our other laws within the country when it comes to illegal immigration. So yes, once we secure the border, yes, once we have this e-verify system put into place, once we have these documentation procedures in place, let's look at the 11 million and grant them the ability to have a pathway towards citizenship. And then we can deal with the trickles that come in from that point, but not beforehand. I'm not in agreement as laid out in Joe Biden's immigration policy that you can find at cfr.org. They are an unbiased, supposedly, organization that looks at the policies of both candidates, both parties, and lays it out, right? So there's some good things, getting rid of policies that separate family at the border, even though there aren't policies that separate families at the border. There are policies that lead to the separation of families at the border. Joe Biden opposes Trump's executive order banning travelers from majority Muslim countries. That's another issue that we can talk about. Dreamers, undocumented residents brought to the United States as children. I would be for that. Granting those dreamers. It wasn't their fault that their parents brought them here. But also, there was one thing he put in here that, again, he said he would immediately grant all of the undocumented immigrants citizenship in the United States. They would immediately be granted citizenship. I don't think that should happen. I don't think that coming here in the wrong way, even with the best of intentions, should be rewarded.
No, because then, like, what do we have, as, immigrants that actually did it the right way? Do we get a refund or something? Or, and honestly, it's not really about the money because, again, we've talked about incentivizing people to do it the right way because, trust me, the word of mouth gets out a lot quicker. So if somebody gets a free way or pathway to citizenship, then more people are going to continue pouring into this country. There has to be laws and legislation. There has to be protocol that you have to follow.
I don't believe in the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants in our country, though, which has been proposed on the Republican side. I believe that we have to deal with the issue of people coming into the country illegally. We have to clean up that process for valid asylum seekers. We have to put an e-verify system in place, and then we say to the 11 million who are here, this is your pathway. Come out of hiding, and this is your safe pathway towards citizenship. And I think that would begin to solve the problem. Now, we're always going to deal with issues of immigration. We should do so with compassion, but also with an understanding of the rule of law and the need for laws to be put in place. So that's just our perspective. Again, the Bible is a story of immigrants. So knowing that gives you a sense of compassion going into it. And that's what we should always have, a sense of humanity in meeting the needs of those around us, even outside of our borders, knowing that the world is bigger than our United States experience. And knowing that just gives you a greater outlook on the world and the challenges that are taking place, and how we can bring solutions and champion democracy around the world.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that we can do is just really step out of ourselves and what, our needs are, and what, we just want the best for ourselves, and to really see it and view it as a big picture. Look at all these crises that are happening in different countries. And the first and foremost thing that, we are called to do is pray, is unite with our brothers and sisters that are suffering, that are displaced, that are, suffering in their countries, whatever it may be. And then join forces with, organizations that are really helping to serve and help in this humanitarian, issue that we are dealing with. But also, make sure that you are knowledgeable in regards to what's going on locally and the people that you vote for here. Like we've said before, that we don't believe that just that one person drives the whole machinery. There's so many more people that are responsible for making decisions for our country. So let's pray first and foremost for all of our leaders, regardless of who we believe should be in that seat, presidential seat or the Senate seat or whatever it is. The Bible talks about praying for our leadership so that we can live in peace, so we can have a peaceful life. And so I think sometimes we get so caught up in the whole, you're right, you're wrong, you're not my friend anymore, especially with the social media and how people have taken it to social media to voice their opinions. Our opinions should be what God says. I mean, Jesus even was here and he said, I don't speak of my own accord, I speak what the Father says. And that's the kind of mindset that we should take on, is really look through a lens, from God's perspective, when it comes to, human beings, but also our responsibility as to take actions in, even in the policies that are being made. And the church is a very important institution to participate in these things. So that's what we really wanted to kind of break down today, is this issue of immigration.
So just kind of to draw a fine line here, there are flaws on each side of the aisle when it comes to these issues of immigration. I think Donald Trump's flaws are within his kind of his hardline stances, and even his threats to deport all of these illegal immigrants. I think that is shows a lack of compassion. I think there were some missteps with handling the child separation issue at the border, and I think he should have spoke out more in advance. On the other end, I think that the Democrats do not have a solid plan for securing the border and dealing with the actual issue. They are primarily focused on the 11 million undocumented, and their plan really is just to grant them immediate citizenship. And that is a bit scary for people. I think it's a little radical for people who, it's not that we are afraid of foreigners by any means. I think we're just afraid of being overwhelmed with the need that's going to occur in our country. And what would happen if the 10%, like Victoria said, were given more liberty to come into our country, the 10% of people who are criminals, who are participating in human trafficking or drug trafficking. And so that scares a lot of people. So in that regard, I would vote Republican. that we deal with the issue at hand in closing the borders and in creating an e-verify system and really create a pathway to citizenship from there and pressuring them to create a pathway of citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants who are among us. This is a definite needed conversation. I've worked with people who were undocumented. I've been friends. I still have friends who are undocumented, and it's a challenge. And I think we should approach it, which is kind of Donald Trump's downfall, from a position of compassion and not demonizing those individuals. It creates a culture of fear. And I think that we should embrace those individuals in the situation that they are right now and do our best to help them find a pathway forward. On the other end of it, I know Donald Trump's statements can be politicized. Coming down from that escalator back in 20 whatever, when he was first announcing his presidency and he made the famous statements about immigration, and the one that was pulled out, him calling Mexicans rapists. It's just inaccurate.
Right.
He wasn't calling all Mexicans rapists, but saying that there were Mexicans coming across the border, and some of them were criminals, rapists, etc. And there is a high number of rapes occurring on the trail that people are traveling to come up through Mexico and to
Children
the United
abuse
States
and-
border. It's horrific.
And one thing that I do appreciate about Donald Trump is that he really does, stand to honor and really help to facilitate our veterans, because I think that our veterans are really underappreciated in a way where they don't get the and that's another conversation, but I'm talking about even getting the help that they need, healthcare wise. And so we're so worried about sometimes our outside people that, well, a lot of times we forget those people that have served our country, that have have PTSD, that have health issues, and we don't take care of them. So I do appreciate him in that sense, that he says we really do need to focus on people that have served our country.
Or just the issues within our borders.
Borders, yeah.
I get that. I understand. Well, I hope you gained something out of that, and hope that helps you as you're considering voting. I heard recently here locally, our senators, or our current senator and the challenger in the election, are going to have some debates locally. I'm going to be listening into that. I'm really believing that that's even more important than the crazy presidential debates. Yeah. So be on the lookouts for town halls, things that are going to be live streamed with your senators. It's important for you to be a part of the political process and let your voice be heard and your values heard. This is a needed conversation, and we're Ryan and Victoria Cole. If you're on YouTube right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you're updated whenever we go live or produce new content. But we hope that you are enjoying this podcast. Let us know your opinions and thoughts. Comment on our social media, and just reach out to us, email us, DM us,
or even comment down below. Let us know what your thoughts are about this issue, what some of the challenges that you may see that we may not have covered.
We're okay with being challenged as well in our thoughts,
sure.
too. So, but we'll see you next week on another episode of Needed Conversations. God bless.
See you next time.